Over the weekend, 100 migrants were found crammed into the back of a big rig truck at the Texas border as the crisis there continues to get worse. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Costa Rica right now as we speak, addressing what he is calling, quote, the root cause of immigration into the United States. And joining us now for more on this topic, plus the origins of the coronavirus and that Texas voting law, is Texas Congressman Lance Gooden. Congressman, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have you in studio,
sitting
next to me. How you been?
I'm great. It's great to be here.
That's great to have you in. Things are starting to feel like the old normal again.
They are.
Which is a good thing.
It's been normal in Texas for a while, though.
We're glad to hear that. We're in New York City, obviously,
Right.
and things have been abnormal for the better part of a year and a half right now. So I applaud what your governor has done there. By the way, this is off topic, but you guys were criticized when you got rid of that mask mandate.
Yeah, if you recall, we were called Neanderthals by the president.
Right. I believe the president.
Neanderthal thinking, and look at us now.
And who was right in the long run?
The Republican governor and the people of Texas were right.
Yeah.
We've opened up early and we're thriving, just like places like Florida. And the rest of the nation has used us as a model, I believe.
That with a crisis that you're dealing with on your southern
That's
border,
right.
The largest border state. So we just heard Vice President Kamala Harris speaking there. She says that she eats no for breakfast. Clearly, she's said no to anything that has to do with the border. She hasn't gone to the border. She hasn't held a press conference talking about going to the border. My question to you is, at what point do the people in Texas just feel like they've been totally forgotten?
Well, I think we already feel that way. I think that we recognize that we've got to take action ourselves. The Texas legislature took action this session, and the Governor Abbott, realizes that he's got to do something because we can't count on the feds to do what's right. The Biden administration won't admit that there's a crisis, and when they do privately admit it, they have to move funds around, like these COVID relief funds that they're spending at the border, because they know if they say, hey, we need to pass a bill to actually fund the border, then they're admitting that there really is a problem, which they don't want to do.
They don't want to admit that,
Right.
and Kamala might be running for president at some point, so she doesn't want to take a position on these key issues that could maybe hurt her in the future. We're still waiting on the numbers for the month of May when it comes to illegal crossings. We're expecting those at any moment. What we could see could be even worse than what we saw in April. It could be the worst we've had in 40 years. Is the situation getting any better at the border?
I don't think so. If anything, I hear privately from Democrats that they realize they've got a real problem on their hands. They'll say that quietly walking through the halls of Congress. They won't say it on television.
Right.
But I don't know that they want to do anything. I think they're afraid of upsetting the far left, but they do recognize that it could potentially be the greatest crisis of the election cycle next year for them, and I do believe that they'll lose the House because of it, and possibly the Senate.
Meantime, drugs just continue to pour in every small town in America. It can take less than a day from drugs to go from the border in Texas or New Mexico, Arizona, California, get to any other state in the country, which is just shocking. And I don't think people are aware of that because that's like a sub-issue. Dr. Fauci apparently wrote a new book. We were just talking about that. The book's called Expect the Unexpected. It's got nothing to do with that COVID lab leak theory. I didn't think it would. But that theory has picked up a lot of momentum over the last 10 days. You tweeted out recently, I thought this was interesting. The lab leak revelations are not vindication of Donald Trump, but that the media have been lying to the American people for a year and a half. Do you think the media has been lying? Do you think they've been deliberately derelict in covering up where this thing might have come from?
I do. If you recall a year ago when President Trump said this thing came from China, we need to look into it, they said he was xenophobic. You remember, he was one of the first people that said, let's close down the borders.
Right.
And he was basically called a Neanderthal for thinking that way, but he was right. And move forward to now, it's obvious that there are some Chinese origins of this virus, and we want to explore that. When Donald Trump wanted to explore it, he was called a racist, and now that Joe Biden wants to potentially get to the bottom of it, finally, we welcome him in that search. But the double standard is just unbelievable.
So Senator Lindsey Graham, he said that, short of all-out war with China, which is something we don't want, but, let's face it, at least 3.5 million people worldwide have died from this. The WHO says the number could be closer to 11 million. Short of all-out war, we've got to put together the biggest, most effective sanctions package in American history until they let investigators into that lab in Wuhan. Do you think something like that could happen, or are we never going to get an answer to the biggest question right now in this century?
Anything could happen, but I work with people in Congress that don't believe that Israel should have the Iron Dome rockets to protect themselves. So there's just a lot of irrationale in Washington. This thought that China should get off free after the last year, after the destruction of our economy and the death of so many millions of people, of American lives that we have lost to this virus. I think anything other than holding them accountable is unconscionable.
Not us at Newsmax. We've been talking about
That's
this
right.
for months and
You're
months
right.
about the possible origins. Yeah, no, it's just, listen, we try to be objective, but if there is something that might be credible out there, like this lab leak theory, people were laughing at us 7 months ago when we were talking about this. Not so much right now. All right, I want to play you a soundbite. This is former presidential candidate, former Senate candidate, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke talking about that new Texas voting law. Take a listen.
The poll tax 100 years ago was somewhat innocuous sounding. The literacy test, the counting the number of jelly beans in a jar, but in every instance they were used to try to stop Black Texans and African Americans throughout the former Confederacy from being able to use their rights to vote. And in that same way, ending souls to the polls and closing polling places in predominantly African American neighborhoods is doing the exact same thing in 2021.
Do you know Beto O'Rourke at all, just out of curiosity?
I've met him a couple times. He was always friendly.
Yeah, interesting guy. They made comparisons when he was running for president to Bobby Kennedy and that, but he's incredibly, I mean, he leapfrogged Bobby Kennedy as far as progressive policies go. Basically, he's saying that, and this is the spin that's happening, this is Georgia 3.0, this Texas voting law. What's happening in Texas, aren't we just doing away with measures, temporary measures, that were put in place because coronavirus in the fall?
We are, and we're also in that bill that he's talking about, putting some teeth into laws that have been unenforceable. Just in my race alone last year, I had poll watchers on election night that were forbidden from being in the counting room. State law says they should be able to be in there, and they were just told they couldn't be just because. And there's no teeth to enforce the law, and so this bill did some of that. Perfectly reasonable. It keeps cheaters out of the process, and it absolutely allows people to vote and expands voting in some cases, and I disagree with his analysis.
What do you make of that spin? Because the spin is that this is Jim Crow era laws that are happening in Texas.
I think it's outrageous, and I'll throw in too, I think it's crazy that some of these corporations jumped in. I'm disappointed in folks like American Airlines who need to stick to flying airplanes and stay out of politics.
Quickly, do you think that the real goal at the border, now again, 70 days, Kamala Harris hasn't done a thing. Do you think the goal is to try and turn Texas blue and to change the voting base in Texas?
I think the goal is to turn America blue, starting with places like Texas and Georgia. They had success in Georgia this last cycle, and I think their goal is to change the law because they know that in the next cycle they're going to really have some bad results, especially in these House races across the nation.
Congressman, come back and see us in studio again. Pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great information. All right, we've got a lot more to